You're listening to the Cavalier Connection podcast. Here is your host, Jack Lowe.
Welcome into another edition of the Cavalier Connection podcast. I'm your host, Jack Lowe. I'm not joined by my dad, Jeff, or Jay tonight or today. We always film at night. This is kind of weird. But I am joined by quite the replacement, Jackson Hephner from Cavs Corner. We've been meaning to get him on for a while now. Not really. I was going to say kind of new. You're not really new with Cavs Corner anymore. You've been there for quite a while. How you doing today, Jackson, and how's it going for you?
I'm doing well. Yeah, like you said, it's been, it's funny because I think we're coming up on a year at this point. Because I was lucky enough to get connected to Brad. I think about like a week or two after I graduated from JMU, and that was today. I believe is the 1 year anniversary of me graduating. So.
Oh yeah, because all the ceremonies are happening across all the universities in the Commonwealth. But you're not supposed to mention the JMU grad stuff because people are going to hate us now. They're going to be in the comments absolutely blasting us. You bring a JMU. No. He's a great guy. He told me single-handedly because, listen, it's very controversial. Growing up, kind of on the Virginia Tech side a little bit anyways. Then go to school at JMU, but I can assure you all, after conversations in the press box and stuff, he's told me, yeah, I'm kind of siding with Tony Elliott in Virginia now. So, but of course, you're always going to have your alma mater in there too. So,
no, yeah, I mean, I've lived in the Commonwealth my whole life, and like you said, I have family that went to UVA, I have family that went to Tech, went to JMU. So like, I just kind of hope everyone has fun. Yeah, I hope everyone has fun sometimes.
Especially when you live out that way in Central Virginia, it's all right there. Whereas I'm in Hampton Roads, I'm near Old Dominion. That's really the only, and then you got Hampton and Christopher Newport, which, Sunbelt baseball, that's, interesting too. ODU's making a run, but that's another story. But I wanted to touch really quick before we get too far into basketball and football. For those of you who've been paying attention to softball, by the way, playing today, I don't know. I think I'm going to get this posted tonight, so they would have already been done. They're making runs. That's been fun to watch. They have to beat Tennessee twice. They're literally throwing the first pitch as we speak right now. And then you covered some of the baseball, Jackson. Just what are your thoughts on the baseball? I know there's been a lot of injuries, and they've been on the down spiral a little bit. But coming up, they've got the ACC tournament coming up this week, and hoping to get a good spot to try and make a run in the big tournament.
Yeah, no, I think baseball has been a little bit of a disappointment for some people. I think in some ways, when you think about, Chris Pollard and Ryan Odom were the two big first-year head coaches on grounds this year. And I think people were kind of hoping that Chris Pollard would kind of have a little bit of a Ryan Odom type of season. Yeah. And that just, it's not happening. Part of that is just because that's a lot harder to do in college baseball compared to college basketball. There's just not as much money in there. There's not a lot of movement. So I think, obviously, Chris Pollard is a great coach. We know that from his time at Duke, and he's put together a solid roster. I think, like you said, the injury bug hit him pretty bad, and they haven't had the luckiest of breaks. But I think overall, I think for a first year, I wouldn't call this a disaster by any stretch of the imagination. I think obviously you would have wanted to finish at or above 500 in league play. They fell like, 14 and 16. So they fell right below that line, which is unfortunate. But, overall, I think, just we'll have to see what happens in the postseason. I mean, anything can happen in the college baseball postseason. We all know that. But, if they peter out early on, which I think is kind of unfortunately a likely possibility, I wouldn't necessarily call us a disaster by any means.
No, and it's year one, right? And you mentioned, I think it's a great point. It's a lot harder to do it in baseball than basketball. Basketball, you have 5 players on the floor at a time. Baseball, you got an entire bullpen, an entire starting rotation that you got to get right, and an entire lineup to get right. And the injury bug hit them. And also, like, even let's just say for basketball, for Ryan Odom's sake, if Ryan Odom nobody expected him to have the year that he did in year one, and that kind of overshadows it a little bit because it's kind of unrealistic expectations for year one for Pollard. But had a nice start to the season, had some great wins. I think it's fine. I do want to see what they do in the postseason. It's going to be really interesting to watch. But for Ryan Odom and basketball, we'll transition there. Like I just said, completely exceeded expectations year one, in my opinion. The offseason seems to be going well, returning a huge core. Just what are your overall thoughts on what he's had going on? This offseason, obviously, a lot more people care about basketball. They understand what's going on. Urion Dixon got committed. We have the high school recruit that's super tall. It's committed now. A lot of offseason moves for Odom and returning that core group of guys.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I was just working on a story today, kind of like breaking down, the basketball roster and kind of how things stand. So, look forward to that this week on Caps Corner. Had a little plug there, but yeah, I
Go for it.
mean, yeah, you start. I mean, like you said, you start with that core of returners, right? I mean, to bring back every eligible player. I mean, that's huge. That just doesn't happen in today's day and age in college basketball. And then, obviously you did. I mean, the senior class from last year, it was a very strong class, right? You're losing guys like, Malik Thomas, and you're losing guys like Dallin Hall. These are big holes. These are substantial contributors that you're losing and you got to fill. And I think so far, Odom has done a really good job of identifying guys who can kind of come in and fill those spots. So, you have Dixon and you have Christian Harmon from Arkansas State. Those are two shooters. Harmon's a little bit more of a wing as well. So, you're filling those holes there. Like you mentioned the big man. I'm going to try my best to pronounce.
I don't know how to pronounce it, but
I think it's about five. Yeah. Favor Ibe.
We'll figure it out next year. Remember, we had to pronounce Hugo Onyenso's name. We didn't know that, so
right.
we'll figure it out.
Yeah, no. So another 7-footer to pair up with Grunlow and give them a little bit of depth there at the center position. That's going to be really good. Okay, this is another one that I might have a little bit of trouble pronouncing, but a forward, Kalu Enya, I think it is, out of St. Louis.
Whatever you say is right. I don't.
Yeah. Fingers crossed. But yeah, no, he redshirted last year, so it wasn't part of that St. Louis March Madness run. However, he is a pretty solid forward coming from a very solid mid-major program, and that's going to add you some depth behind DeRitter. So really, I think the only big thing that's left is really just another point guard. That's the one position where the Who's only have one player, Chance Mallory, and I think it's, Chance Mallory is going to be the starter. I think that's a pretty fair prediction to make. Yep. He did wonderful as a 6-man last year. It just makes sense progression wise, and he'll be a great starter. I believe that. But it is like you look at every other position's at least got 2 guys, and most of them has like 3 or 4. So you are kind of wondering, like, okay, is that the last thing? Is that the last piece here? Does Odom get that backup point guard, and then, maybe another one just for good measure, and we just kind of go like, all right, we're good. But yeah, so I think just with what we have now, obviously the off season is, we're still in the off season very much. There's still time, but there's a lot to like about this roster so far.
Certainly, and a storyline that I'm looking at for point guard and I did a story on it weeks ago now. Elijah Gertrude, he is returning, so he'll kind of. I've heard many different things that Odom wants him to be that backup role kind of. We saw him try to take a step this past year. He got some minutes early in the season, didn't have much production. But the athleticism's there. We saw him in the NC State game make the dunk, and of course it's all garbage time. That's the thing. It's so hard to gauge his success, but we know the athleticism's there. We know the defensive ability is there. He's not much of a shooter. I know he's been working on that. Do you think he could maybe get some, significant playing time this coming year, or is he still going to be kind of the piece he's already been on the bench?
I think it's a really good question. I think, from what we saw of Gertrude, like you said, there's certainly a talent there. I definitely would like to see, I would like to see him and expect to see him get a little bit more minutes this next year. But yeah, no, I think we'll really have to see. I think that'd be very interesting to see how he would fit into that point position if he could fill that role. Maybe he comes in and he plays the same role that Chance did last year, and be that 6-man off the bench. But yeah, like I said, I mean, pretty much every time Gertrude hit the floor, we saw something, right?
It was exciting. It was exciting.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing, like whenever somebody brings up just Gertrude, like just says his name, the first thing I think of is that monster dunk he had. I think it was NC State.
Yeah, you missed it. You weren't there. I was. I don't think you were at that game.
I was not at that game. No.
Thank God I was there. And I tell you, the atmosphere around the media section is, there's no cheering in the press area. and whatever. And not that there was cheering, but everybody in unison, like nobody could believe. Everybody knew the athleticism was there, but nobody. The thing is I wrote this. I had a lot of fun with this piece on our website. Is like he never even looked at a teammate. He never looked anywhere. It was tunnel vision to the basket, and you could see him just go up like it was nothing. He had all intentions and just slant. It was incredible. But I agree with you. I think there's definitely going to be another point guard to be had on this roster. The problem with Gertrude is he doesn't exactly play Odom's style of a point guard because of the shooting, and that's the main thing. Odom wants shooters 1 through 5, almost 1 through 5 at this point, basically. But I still think he could be such a playmaker. He's still getting better every day since the scooter accident years ago. So it's going to be interesting to watch. But out of that core group of returners, we'll take Gertrude out of the equation. So you're talking about DeRitter, Grunlow, Chance, and Sam Lewis are the main 4. Is there one in particular that you're most excited about returning? Maybe it's DeRitter or the leadership of Lewis. Or what are you excited about in that group?
Well, so I think, DeRitter's the obvious pick, right? He was a guy who, when he came in, everyone was expecting him to be a 1-year guy and goes right to the NFL draft. And I think it was a bit of a shock when he came back. I think he was the first returner who, his announcement was really just kind of a whoa, okay, this is happening type of thing. So he's the obvious answer. I am really curious to see Grunlow and just kind of the progression. I know he's not the most exciting name on paper just because, his first year, he was a little bit raw. He was a little, he had some moments. He's a young player. He doesn't quite. He's different from DeRitter. I know we love to kind of group the 2 European guys together, but he's different from DeRitter in the sense that DeRitter was a much more. I think he's a lot of older player. He's had a little bit more experience, internationally and everything. And so I think that, Grunlow, he's a younger guy. He's got a little bit more development to go, but I'm really curious to kind of watch him, especially, he got a lot of benefit last year from having Hugo behind him, because Hugo is another very experienced center.
They were like 20-20 for minutes, like 20 minutes per piece. Like they were splitting the minutes for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really excited to see what, the new recruit, the new 7-footer coming to town, what he's going to do with eBay. But, I think it's going to be a different dynamic between the two of them because you have this younger, this high school recruit coming in. And then, all of a sudden Grunlow is now the veteran, right? He's the guy with the experience. So I'm really curious to kind of see if Grunlow can kind of take that next step, both in terms of a leadership, but also just, maybe he's out there on the floor a little bit longer. He's anchoring, the team a little bit more down low. So I think that's definitely something that I'm excited to see.
And you're starting to realize more and more. When I first brought up basketball and I was talking about the offseason progression, why I didn't initially mention his name, the new recruit, because I don't want to get it wrong. But yeah, it's Favori, but something like that. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch because I think you really have another Grunlow Onyenso type situation. And Grunlow, I love what you said. I do want to see his progression. I hate that his wrist injury happened in the postseason. I think that really hindered. Without that, I think Virginia could make even more of a run than they did, at least get past Tennessee. I want to see the jump shot get more consistent from him because early in the season, it looked really good against the mid-majors. It kind of died off towards the end. But they obviously DeRitter. And then Chance, I'm really excited for Chance because that's one of your last traditional college basketball guys that you're going to get, if that makes any sense. I think, we don't know in 2026, but I want to predict he's going to be here for 4 years. And he's going to be that guy, that London Parantes for Virginia, that kind of player. He was grinded it out all 4 years and made it. He's the hometown kid. So I'm obviously excited to see him. So I think there's a lot to be excited about, with this roster.
Yeah, for sure. And you kind of mentioned there with Chance, I think a lot of people are really hoping that he is the next great 4-year UVA player. And it kind of makes sense if you really think, he's the Stab kid. He grew up here, like you mentioned, I've kind of said before, and maybe I'm biased just because I am a Charlottesville kid. But I think I really love the fact that Odom went out and, got these kids, got Chance from Stab, and is recruiting out of this area. Because I think that does add a lot in terms of the program's identity and in terms of its roots, and, I think that's an underrated part of college basketball. We talk about all these programs that are out in all these small college towns and they have nothing to do with a college town. Right. So I do love the fact that, UVA, at least for men's basketball, and and sure, and in other sports as well, is still kind of committed to keeping it rooted in Charlottesville.
Yeah, definitely. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch. And he's a bit undersized, too. That's why I don't think we're going to lose him to the NBA. And I hate to say that. And I hope it works out for him. But, undersized. And I think that's what happened with DeRitter. I don't know if DeRitter thinks, I don't know if you weren't really seeing him mention in many NBA mock drafts or anything. I'm guessing, and obviously he has an agent that's telling him advice and whatever. I just don't think he got enough attention from the NBA. So, hey, if you're going to make NIL money in college, why not return for one? And he only has one more year of eligibility, obviously. So that's going to be exciting. But I want to transition to football if that's all good.
Yeah.
You were at the spring game. You saw that, such a small sample size. I always tell people are asking me about it. I'm like, they didn't call one play that they're going to call in a real game this year. So it's so hard to gauge, success. But obviously, I think the biggest talking point, the offensive line is so experienced, such veterans. That should be the staple to this team. And then obviously we saw a lot of running back depth, and there's so much to talk about. Let's start with the main thing, though. We didn't see much of him, but Bo Prabula, or the quarterback position in general, we saw a little bit the spring game. We saw some of the speed and mobility, and we know what he did at Missouri. Just what are your thoughts on him and the entire quarterback room?
Yeah, I think I think Bo is obviously he's the one who's kind of taking the headlines, and I think in some ways he kind of feels like the most natural pick to be the starter. Like we said, we didn't see that much of him during the spring game, but we know what he can do. He's coming from an SEC program, had a great year. I always find it, I don't know about you, I always find it a little ironic that he played for Missouri but wasn't in the Gator Bowl.
I know. It's
yeah,
hilarious.
it always throws me for a loop whenever we talk about him. I'm like, oh yeah. But anyway, so Bo, he's an extremely talented quarterback. I think he could do very well in this system. I will say though, the quarterback that we saw a lot of was Eli Holstein during the spring game. He was getting a lot of reps, and he didn't have the flashiest day by far, but like he had a lot of really strong, solid plays, solid drives, solid throws, and I think unfortunately, I think as much as I was kind of high on Cole Greer a little bit, and kind of thinking like, hey, maybe if they're talking about a three-way race here, Greer didn't have that great of a day, and I think it kind of cemented at least for the for right now
for this year,
for this year, or at least even just maybe just for the spring, because you never know what's going to happen in August, but at least for right now, it does really kind of seem like it's going to be Bo and Eli, right? Those two kind of feel like the most natural pick to be started. Who knows? Maybe Cole can have just a awesome preseason camp and like fix, shake off the rust and fix all the, all the issues that we saw during the spring game. But right now, I think, if you're a betting man, not encouraging it, but just saying it, Bo and Eli, right? Those are the two. And I think, they both have very different skill sets. They both have pros and cons. Bo kind of feels like a little bit more of the flashier choice, in terms of the dual threat. But Eli is solid. Eli, like Holstein has a very solid track record behind him, right? So, I think it's going to be one of those QB competitions that I wouldn't expect an immediate answer in August, right? I don't think it's going to be like first day of preseason camp, boom, it's Bo, or boom, it's Eli. I think, and you might have to correct me because you're more familiar with how, Tony Elliott does his QB competitions than I am, but it kind of does feel like this one might go a little to the wire.
A little bit. And the other thing about Eli's young too. He's in his second or third year. I think he's a redshirt sophomore, maybe. I have to correct myself. But he's got a couple more years of eligibility. So, even if he gets the job or doesn't get the job this year, you got to expect that he might be who Elliott leans on the following year. But again, we also said that last year about Danny Kaelin. And, we saw him against Wake Forest, and it didn't really go well. But again, there's so much that goes into that. He didn't prep to be the starter that week, blah, blah, blah. And obviously he's back at Nebraska now. So I think it's going to be interesting. And it's funny you say about Elliott, how he likes to do his quarterback chase. It's been different every year. The first year I truly think of, his first year was Brennan Armstrong. That's when he took over from Bronco, and, that was a given. Brennan had a Heisman type season the year before. But the first true quarterback battle I can think of is Tony Muskett and Anthony Colandrea. And, Muskett is the older guy with experience out of Monmouth, and, he can consistently deliver throws. But Colandrea is this hotshot freshman, or, became sophomore. And, he had speed, he's flashy, And Calandria ended up getting that job. And he said it was kind of a battle all the way until the fall when he finally named Calandria. But he, said all offseason, like, hey, they're both going to be okay. No matter who gets the job, they're going to be supportive of one another. And
Yeah.
I know that's a tongue twister. And then we saw Calandria get benched before the Virginia Tech game. And now, now that we've learned a little bit more, the personalities weren't quite there. Last year, it sounded like from the start, Chandler Morris was the starter. He said it from the offseason. He said it during the winter, during the spring. He's our guy. So it kind of changes every year. But anyways, so I think Prebula is going to be fun to watch if it's him. I love to see, I love the mobility. I love the flashiness. And I love the ability to be able to get out of the pocket and create something out of nothing. But would you agree with me that this offensive line is, the staple of the team? And, I'm not going to say win or lose with the offensive line, but they look really, really good.
Yeah, I think it's certainly, I would say it's the most, I guess maybe stable part.
Now, hold on. I'm going to stop you here. I'm going to go and knock on wood, knock on my desk. Because God knows Virginia, I get scared, man. Practice, I swear, they're a medical school, and they have a lot of great medical schools, and just it doesn't mean anything. But continue.
Yeah, shout out UVA Health. We love UVA Health. But anyway, but yeah, no, I think there's the offensive line is kind of unique compared to some of the other position groups in terms of the sense of like you kind of mentioned, like there's a lot of talent there, but there's also like they have so many returning guys. You have. You think about the guys who are going to be anchoring that, like Boley, and you think exciting. About, it's very exciting. Like, and I call it the most stable in the sense of like, so many of these are like, we talk about the QB room. The QB room is like almost entirely new people, except for like Cole Gear. And like, he's been he was a third stringer last year. The running back room is, you got, X is coming back, but that's pretty much it. Right. Receivers, it's the same deal. It's like, Cameron Courtney, but that's about it. The offensive line, it's guys who have been here for at least a year at this point. They're anchoring, they're so talented. They're much more, it feels like they're very together already. When you kind of think about like, I believe there are 3 starters who are returning on that line, if I remember correctly off the top of my head.
It might be 4 or 5. I got to tell you, it's at least, I think it's 4. I think 4 is the number. And all of them could have been, because a lot of them actually just graduated. You saw some of the Instagram posts, and you could see, there's Josie, there's Boley,
right.
But they're in their 5th year, the grad years or whatever. I think there's 4. What I can think of is Boley, Josie, Drake Metcalf, and there's one more that I'm forgetting here. But yes, you're basically correct.
Yeah, no, and like you said, it's like a lot of these guys, like I think a lot of these guys we weren't expecting to come back. Because I think. I'll be honest, and maybe this is just because I was knee deep in JMU stuff for the past couple of years before last year. I kind of forgot that they had an extra year of eligibility, because they were granted that extra year of eligibility after, I believe it was 2022, if I remember correctly. So these are guys who are all choosing to come back. They have the extra year and they're using it. And they're not only using it, they're staying at Virginia. So I think, that's a really powerful thing, especially in today's day and age of college football, not just the fact that this is a talented group that has chemistry already, but just the fact that this is a group of guys who have been here, who are choosing to stay here, who are choosing to take that extra year to be here. And I think, like you said, I think they are, to me, it kind of feels like it's like the heartbeat of the program. It's the heartbeat of the team at this point. Like these are the veterans who are going to establish for the new guys, like, hey, this is what Virginia football is. And especially coming off after last year, when they finally had that chance to establish that winning culture, I think that's huge.
Absolutely. And it's, like I say, it's really exciting. And I say it before the beginning of every season. I'll say it again once we do our big season preview before the season is, I'm not going to say live or die with the offensive line, but I am going to say if the offensive line is playing good, Virginia will win football games. If they're not, Virginia will lose football games. It's the same story every single year. And last year, that offensive line was rotating guys mid-game, not because of injuries, but because of depth. And they were able to, rotate guys, keep guys fresh. And it was such a good offensive line. But I also think because of the experience and, I think receiver is one of the question marks. We don't know too much. There's a lot of young guys, there's a lot of youth in Dylan Newton-Short, Abdullah, Isaiah Robinson. and Cam Courtney, as you mentioned, he's going to have to take a step up this year. But the running back room has so much depth, and I think this team is going to run the football a lot, and I think they're going to do it successfully.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that was kind of the big takeaway from the spring game, right?
Mm-hmm.
You had 4 backs out there, and they all had a moment. They all had a great. I mean, Solomon Beebe, the transfer from UAB, coming out of nowhere, having that 2 touchdown game. I mean, that in and of itself kind of gives you a little bit of hope in the running back room. But then you think about, the four other guys who are out there. Jaquel Middlebrook, he scored a touchdown. Payne Lewis had a 51-yard rush. Zay Davis had a 34-yard rush. I mean, like, these are impressive performances. And yes, it was the spring game, and yes, you got to put an asterisk on it. But the fact that, we saw at least like one quality moment from 4 separate running backs is like that. I mean, that's huge.
And that's not even counting Xavier Brown and Noah Vaughn, who didn't play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I think it's going to be, it's going to be a team that they're going to run it up your throat. They got a great offensive line. They have a great running back room. I think particularly if you go with Perbula, I think that's one kind of like notch in Perbula's belt is the fact that he is such a good dual threat quarterback. So if you want to do a run heavy offense, you can slide Bo in there and he's going to be able, you got that threat of like, okay, you not only have to worry about the running back, you got to also worry about, the quarterback, and once the quarterback is able to establish the fact that, he has the legs to be able to run, then when he throws a bomb downfield, it's going to catch everybody by surprise. Right. Yep. It's almost like, I mean, this is like the, it's very exciting kind of imagining that sort of offense. It's almost, in a way, it almost feels like a military academy, like maybe not as extreme, but you know what I mean, right? Like you got, everybody in the backfield can run it and you never know what they're going to do sort of situation.
Yeah, I've got goosebumps right now just thinking about it. So I cannot wait. I got to tell you, I cannot wait for Norfolk State to come to town and to get back rolling, man. I miss football so much. Mm-hmm. It's going to be so much fun to watch. We'll talk really quick about the defense before we get you out of here, and I really appreciate your time. Just what stands out to you about them? Again, very similar story to last year in the sense of a completely new defensive back room, but there seems to be a lot of depth there, and there seems to be a lot of, great players. It's just a matter of how are they going to perform, and that's something that Coach Rudd did so good last year. He brought that completely new group together, so you got to believe he could do it again. And then that defensive line, I tell you, that defensive line looks outstanding. And of course, during the spring game, it's like, well, is our defensive line, bad, or is our offensive line good? Is it both? Chase Morrison looked really good at defensive tackle. He was the big story of the spring game. And then you have returners like Hammond. I can go on and on listing names. There's so many names. There's so much depth. Just what do you take away from the defense?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think the defense it's a very interesting unit because it's kind of like a healthy mix of, you have your returning contributors from last year. A few of them started, most of them were reserves who still got some pretty quality minutes in there. Or I'm using a basketball term there, but you know what I mean.
Yeah,
and then, yeah, it happens. But yeah, and then you mix that in with, some new fresh faces out of the portal, as well as some younger guys who maybe they were here last year and they just didn't get the chance to shine, and maybe they're brand new, like fresh out of high school or whatever. I think the big one for me the name that I heard a lot, especially after the spring game, was Caleb Hardy. I think particularly with Cam Robinson out for this spring, I mean, you think about Hardy kind of had that opportunity, as linebacker to kind of show a little bit of what he could do, right? It was kind of his opportunity to kind of step in and, he played a lot last year, but he wasn't necessarily the guy. Mm-hmm. And, he had a really strong performance in the spring game. Tony Elliott, he was one of the players that Tony Elliott mentioned by name as, hey, I saw, I think that it was something along like I saw Caleb Hardy out there a lot. It's good to see that. And so I think there's just a lot of guys who, both from a playing perspective as well as a leadership perspective, maybe weren't the loudest guy in the room last year, but because kind of like with basketball, because there's a lot of holes and they lost a lot of production and a lot of leadership. This is kind of their opportunity to shine.
Yeah, absolutely. And like we say, there's so many names offensively and defensively that are new. We're not going to truly know how good some of these guys, how good of a team it's going to be until we see them get into. I mean, week 0, it's going to be crazy starting the year off against NC State. NC State's a high caliber opponent to start the year off with. It's going to be so. I assume you're not making the trip to Brazil, are you?
I will not. I will not.
No,
Yeah, Deuce Prince will be there, so he'll be
you
the Cavs
will.
corner rep. But I will. I unfortunately will not be head out to Brazil. That's a little bit out of my budget, to
A
be
little bit.
honest.
I
Yeah.
was joking about Greg Medea from the Daily Progress. It sounds like he's trying, and it
Mhm.
sounds like they're going to get to send him. And he's talking about like you got to get vaccines and stuff. Like you can't just go to Brazil. You got to get so
Mhm.
much done. So it's going to be so interesting. Just as we wrap up here, is there anything else you want to mention about football? The schedule obviously a bit on the easier side again. I'd say that not as easy as last year, but a bit on the easier side again. I know we've got 2 Friday night games out. It's been announced, which a little bit of a secret is personally, I love it because now I can go to those games. I didn't know if I was going to be able to go before, but for the fan base, you're not really happy because you're taking away the Saturdays. So
Yeah, it's a very like interesting schedule in the sense of like you mentioned, like there's a lot of I
neutral
think
site too.
yeah, but like there are two neutral site games as well. I believe it's two because you have Brazil and then you also have West
Bank of
Virginia
America.
at Bank of America, right? So I mean it's still a pretty good home lineup in the sense of like I believe it's like 6 or 7 home games even with all of this, kind of, weirdness to it, So I think it, and like you said, it is a very similar draw to last year in terms of it is a bit on the easier side. You are kind of missing some of those, marquee games, right? So I do think it's going to be curious to kind of see how the Who's navigate it. They did get SMU on the road. I think that's the one kind of ACC game I'm looking at. Like, okay, that'll be an interesting one. That'll tell us a lot. But and also just like I think one of the things about it is that I mean the ACC as a whole is like just so hard to gauge,
Unpredictable.
unpredictable. Like obviously like the big one we always talk about is the Virginia Tech game, right? I don't know what Virginia Tech's going to look like this year,
Oh man.
and then like right before that's UNC. I don't know what UNC is going to look like this year. There's just so many teams in the ACC where it's like you kind of look at them and it's like that team could either be, way above our expectations or somehow way below.
It reminds me a lot last year. Last year was Bill Belichick's first year. We didn't have a clue. We didn't know what
Mhm,
to expect.
mhm,
And nobody, from an outsider perspective, nobody expected Virginia to be what Virginia was. But when you look at this year, there's multiple. The one that comes to, well, Virginia Tech is the first one that comes to mind. Nobody knows what James Franklin and his Hokies are going to look like, and you know me as a person. I cannot wait for that game. That I'm going to make the trip.
mhm,
That's going to be an unbelievable experience. And man, that's a huge game for Virginia. But on second thought, you also have Florida State is a big one to me. Mike Norvell. This is kind of it, make it or break it for him. He has so much talent. And, you saw what he did last year before they played Virginia. They looked really good, and then
mhm.
they ended up falling. So, you just don't know. And then, of course, like you just said, Carolina, they fired a bunch of people, and now they might be good this year. I even think that Syracuse game could be a little frightful. I think they might take a step in the right direction. You just never know.
Yeah, I think as a whole, it's going to be it's just going to be a strange year for the conference. And I think because you're coming off of such a strange football season,
Yeah.
Like
Duke was whatever they were, 7-5
Mhm.
and in the conference championship game. That was pretty strange.
Right. And then, as much as I personally am a defender of conference championships, like
Yes.
I would like them to stick around. However, I will say if you're trying to get rid of conference championships, the fact that Miami did not make the ACC championship and then made a run to the national championship might be the strongest argument you can make.
Yeah.
Right. Like
Absolutely.
it was just ridiculous. It was absolutely
Yeah.
ridiculous. I don't know if I've even told you this, but part of me like almost kind of wishes like I would have been fine in an alternate universe where Miami played Virginia in the ACC championship and Miami won by like
I would
30.
have rathered that. I would have
Right?
rathered that 100% because man, that game broke my soul. That game
Yeah.
broke my soul.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I could sit here. We could talk for hours. I love talking about college football, the new playoff formats, and because I'm a defender too, because of team, and I'm biased because of teams like Virginia who probably won't get to the college football playoffs unless they end up winning the ACC, and and the ACC is something to play for every year. realistic expectation, I think, for Coach Elliott to at least be in that top threshold of teams who are in the running by the end of the year to get to the game. So, I am as well, and hopefully that doesn't go away. But, the way things are going with the 2014 playoff, they might be going extinct before too long. But I really appreciate your time with me today, Jackson, on late notice as well. Just what do you got going on over at Cavs Corner? Let the people know where they can find your stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So feel free. Cavs Corner, I believe it's just cavscorner.com. We're on the On3 network, which is always great. So you can just go there. We have, so it is a subscription model. So you might have to subscribe to see some of our content. However, we do have deals a lot of the time. So, feel free to follow our site owner, Brad. Shout out, Brad Franklin. He's at Cavs Corner on Twitter. He usually has the updates in terms of what's going on over in the
Cavs Corner. The
Cavs Corner. Yes, the official account. And then also I mentioned we brought on Deuce Prince from the 4-3-4 defense, who has been an excellent addition. Does incredible video content for us. And then, of course, you also have my written content as well. So, yeah, check us out. We're just, even though we're on the On3 and we got we have the On3 logo slapped on us, we really are just a bunch of local, Virginia-based guys who are Virginia natives, I guess, in the case of Deuce. And, we love talking about the Who's, and we try and pump at least something out once a day. So you'll always have something fresh from us. So, check us out. We'd really appreciate it.
That's really great stuff. I'm going to put you on the spot here. And Brad is such a great guy. He's also a hilarious personality, in my opinion. Do you have either, a story or something about Brad, that you could share, anything funny about? I know it's on the spot. No worries.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to think.
He's a funny guy.
Yeah. Yeah, no, one of the funny things that does happen. So him and I realized this like a couple weeks into the season that him and I were both wrestling fans. So I watch the WWE a lot. He also, and the reason we figured it out was because they kept playing wrestling music before the games at Scott Stadium. I don't know who is doing this.
Or they play the Undertaker bell sometimes before third downs too.
Yeah. So they do that. So it started with I think it was Cult of Personality, which is CM Punk's.
Oh yeah.
And that's like that is a famous rock song that other people have heard outside of wrestling. And him and I kind of I was like, hey, I think that's CM Punk's theme. And he was like, oh, you watch wrestling. And then I think at one point before a game, a couple weeks later, they were playing Seth Rollins' theme song. And that's too specific. That is nobody listens to that song if you don't. It's a great song, don't get me wrong, but nobody is just casually pulling up Burn It Down if you're not a wrestling fan. So that was always a little thing that we could, we'd always talk about. And if you are the guy who works at Scott Stadium who keeps playing wrestling music, shout out to you. We really appreciate the work you're doing.
That's really great. Eric Ward, I don't think he plays the music, but he directs a lot of that stuff, listen in. That's really great. But yeah, I really appreciate your time today, Jackson. Go check out all the stuff at Cavs Corner, and I'll put all the social medias in the description of this. But that's going to wrap us up today. Just go check us out as well, thecavalierconnection.com, all the social medias at Go Who's Podcast, Cavalier Connection everywhere else. And go check us out on Spotify as well. We're on all the Spotifys and Apples. And that'll do it today. You don't have to say it, Jackson. We say it at the end of every episode. Me, my dad, and Jay, we ended off with Go Who's.
Oh, okay, I'll give you a Go Who's. Yeah, we'll give you a little one.
Go